I'm coming in there. With my own two eyes, I'm gonna get a good look at George. And this ain't stopping me.
So, we all know Tarantino's career is full of legendary scenes, but perhaps his most sophisticated use of suspense isn't one that ends in a thunderous shootout.
I love that stuff, you know, the killing.
But this one.
I actually think the Spahn Ranch sequence with Brad is one of my favorite sequences I've ever done. I could not be happier with the effect that it has on an audience, where you get that kind of just dead quiet.
That's why today I want to look at how Tarantino masterfully builds suspense in what he considers his favorite scene among the ones he's created, and which might just be the closest thing we'll ever see to a horror film directed by him. Because if the entire film is a love letter to the twilight of Hollywood's golden era, an almost idealized vision by Tarantino of a bygone, cherished time, this scene is its stark opposite. It's almost a doorway to his nightmare, where we witness Hollywood's darkest side, a shadowy, abandoned film set, overtaken by sectarian drifters, who would eventually bring about the tragic end of Sharon Tate, marking the symbolic demise of an era. But before we dive into what makes it so chilling, let's get some context. This time, our protagonists aren't soldiers or gangsters, they're these guys.
Rick Dalton. And to my left is Rick Stutt Double Cliff Booth.
And there's something really interesting about them.
All right, what's the matter, partner?
The whole thing of their career is Rick is the one who pretends to be the badass cowboy, the guy who can do this and the guy who can do that, and Cliff is the guy who's the badass, who can do this and can do that.
And you can see this dichotomy in these two scenes. While Rick stars in a situation within a fictional western,
Come down here for a Boston social, or we gonna talk price?
the very next scene cuts to Cliff, experiencing a real situation in a setting straight out of a classic western. At some level, they represent the central dichotomy of the film, the tension between reality and fiction, which is precisely what makes the ending so fascinating. But I don't want to get sidetracked. The thing is, Cliff has just dropped Rick off at the set and taken the day to handle a few errands.
Go home, fix my antenna, do whatever. See it right.
Along the way, we get to see some of Cliff's skills, like parkour and hand-to-hand combat in a flashback he recalls. But more importantly, this is the moment where a presence begins to take shape, one that lingers throughout the film like a threat in the shadows. Except, it's not exactly introduced as a threat in the shadows. I mean, when news broke that Tarantino was making a film with Manson as a character, many wondered how he would approach it. After all, Manson seemed like the perfect candidate for Tarantino to create one of his iconic villains or pull off something like this.
Yeah, he's a family man too, with his keys and his gun. He's teaching his children right now. They're learning his beliefs, and they'll be living them.
But the truth is, this is the opposite of how Tarantino typically introduces that kind of character. Here, we see Manson in a rickety, unimpressive car that looks like it's about to fall apart. His introduction isn't grandiose, like Hellstrom's or Landa's. Instead, it's a distant wide shot of him, small and hunched over as he walks with his head down. It's not just Tarantino keeping his distance, it's him demystifying the myth.
What's this shaggy asshole?
He humanizes Manson, and, to some extent, pulls him out of that cliched perception of him.
Hello. Welcome. Do I know you?
No, I'm just looking for Terry.
Can I help you?
Oh, yeah, hey, man, I'm looking for Terry. I'm a friend of Terry's and Dennis Wilson's.
And this is especially clear when he speaks.
Dang. You know where?
He's just a regular guy, and there's a certain pathos in the way he's portrayed, not as a fearsome figure, but as a pitiable one, where he doesn't come across as imposing or threatening at all compared to other versions we've seen on screen. And even in the camera choices, as if Tarantino deliberately decided to deny him the right to a prominent image. Most of the time, he's shown from behind, and he only has 2 moments in the entire film where his face appears in close-up, totaling less than 5 seconds. Instead of portraying Manson, the man, as a devil, Tarantino plays with what we already know about his story, and chooses not to amplify the iconography surrounding his figure. But despite that, placing his presence here is almost strategic from a storytelling perspective, because it makes this scene genuinely unsettling.
Charlie's gonna dig you.
And that's what I want to focus on now. But Before we continue with the essay, I want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace. Honestly, this platform has been a lifesaver for me lately, because I'm trying to get a website up and running for my channel by 2025, and I'm a total noob when it comes to coding and web design. And the great thing about Squarespace is that you don't have to be a tech wizard to use it. For instance, I've tried out their intelligent design feature a bunch of times, and it's seriously amazing. It uses AI to help you create cool designs and get your creativity flowing, so you end up with something that feels truly your own.
Here I come. Oh, here I come.
It's really quick and easy to use, and it helps you make your website look exactly how you imagine, but honestly, the whole platform is super user-friendly. You've got tons of design tools at your fingertips, so you can build the website of your dreams without having to rely only on pre-made templates. Plus, Squarespace has other awesome features, like built-in online stores and easy video uploads, which is perfect for me. So, if this sounds like a fit for you, check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when your site is ready, go to squarespace.com/Lancelotti to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, let's get back to the video.
That's a car. That's a strange car.
Okay, so the scene opens with this shot. Here, for the first time, we get access to the private world of Manson's followers, whom we've already seen earlier in the film, such as in their introduction. And if you look closely, both moments share a common visual choice, because Tarantino frequently uses tilted shots to reflect the instability of these characters. And this approach recurs throughout the sequence, always aiming for the most unsettling angles possible, at times using Dutch angles or, in some cases, with the camera not even properly framed or moving erratically, like in this shot. And it's an introduction that hides quite a lot beneath the surface. To start, they sing "I'll Never Say Never to Always," a song written by Manson himself, with lyrics that already give us a glimpse into his twisted apocalyptic worldview. But anyway, let's get back to the scene. And one detail I really like about this scene is how Tarantino recycles visual elements he used just a few minutes earlier in this other scene. These are two scenes that come one right after the other, and interestingly, share a very similar structure.
You alright, honey?
In both, we have a hero venturing into dangerous territory dominated by outlaws, driven by the goal of rescuing a third party in distress.
You do know kidnapping is a hanging.
In this sense, Tarantino uses quite archetypal aesthetics to portray morality, since while the antagonistic force is surrounded by earth and dark tones, the heroes wear light tones and neat costumes with yellowish tones, which you can also see in the girl that contrasts with the setting.
Where'd you get that limp?
In the war.
You could even say that there are certain parallels between Cliff and this character, both being former combatants in the war, who will end up with a compromised leg.
Hey, I'm not gonna die. Make it a limp, I ain't gonna die.
Of course, this already enters the realm of the subjective, but I think it makes sense because Cliff's character is basically a movie hero off the screen, as I mentioned earlier. And the point is that, even visually, Tarantino starts the two scenes in a similar way, only if before it was fiction, now it is reality. In this sense, Tarantino does not use extra diegetic music as usual, or as in the other sequence, but once he presents the place, he lets the sound give it a disturbing tone. You just have to pay attention to the amount of sounds that are in just a few seconds of introduction, all diegetic, that is, from within the scene. You can identify barking, what appears to be a snake, this other thing that could be either a rooster or sheets flying, flies that give a certain idea of rot. And most importantly, crows, which will be a constant throughout the scene, and which unconsciously have a very strong effect on us, because they are always an omen of death. And I emphasize this because I think the most important aspect of this scene is the construction of the space, which stands out as perhaps the only truly decrepit and filthy location in a film so dedicated to celebrating the beauty of classic Hollywood. And beyond the sound design, this space is established through two key shots. While the perspective of the girl sets the stage, it's Cliff's perspective that fundamentally positions George's house as the central focal point right from the start of the scene. And that focal point, however, is overshadowed by Margaret Qualley's character. When you hear her say,
Come on.
it's almost as if the temptation she represents clouds Cliff's judgment, luring him into the trap. Here we have a tour of the space by Cliff and the girl, where from the outset the presence of these women makes the space look even more decadent and sinister. But at a certain point, the image, with its lateral tracking shot, feels like it's in dialogue with this other moment. It's almost as if we were seeing the before and after. On the one hand, a set with life in full swing and creativity, with a crew that moves vitally working, and that culminates with the climax that feels like a celebration of cinema.
That was absolutely fantastic. I loved it.
Arguably Tarantino's Nirvana. While then we are seeing what was once a great film set, in its purest and hardest decline. It's almost like a graveyard of film. And while this is grounded in a real-life event, it's no accident that Tarantino chooses to depict it here, repeatedly associating this group with the symbolic death of that golden era of cinema. Just look at how the introduction of this group I mentioned earlier ends.
As long as one is one. Inside yourself or your father.
Once again, it's not a straightforward composition, but one taken from an unnatural angle, showing these girls walking past a mural of the movie Giant with James Dean, his final film before his death. And for me, it makes sense that Tarantino chose this mural because Dean was also a symbol of Hollywood's golden age, which, in this context, is being disrupted by those who symbolically represent the beginning of another era.
Hey!
But let's continue with the scene.
Gypsy! I want you to come meet my new friend.
Some old-looking dude in a Hawaiian shirt who just gave Pussycat a ride home.
And here, for the second time, we get an insert shot from inside the house. And to understand its importance, you only need to hear Tarantino discuss his concept of tension.
There's the scene above ground and the scene below ground. And the scene above ground is what's going on and the dialogue and them sitting around this table and talking. Underneath it, it's like the suspense is a rubber band. And I'm just stretching it and stretching it and stretching and see how far it can stretch.
She's bringing him down the ranch to meet everybody.
And the purpose of cutting from Cliff to these women, with this kind of dialogue,
Stay by the door. Tell me if he starts coming this way.
is precisely to build the expectation that they are hiding something beneath the surface. Also, since we know we are watching a Tarantino movie, we tend to believe that whatever these women are hiding is not a good thing. But the reality is that Tarantino plays with our expectations, only to have nothing happen afterward. It's the same exercise he applies throughout the entire film, especially if you think about that anticlimactic ending.
Welcome to our community.
Thanks for having me.
Anyway, when we return to Cliff, we have this interaction with this woman who seems to be taken out of Midsummer. And this is not a minor shot, because this is the moment in the scene where Tarantino bridges the gap between what the audience knows about Manson and the weight of this scene, especially if you weren't familiar with the fact that we're essentially in his home.
Hey, where is everybody? Where's the children? Everybody left for Santa Barbara. Really?
That is why Tarantino dedicates the longest shot of the scene, 45 seconds, to this dialogue, which has an effect on us to pay special attention, because the fact that it stops the rhythm of editing is as if it were putting an accent at this moment.
Charlie's gone, everybody left?
And that accent is for the information. First, now everyone in the room knows that a community is formed there, and second, now we all know that that community is Charlie's. That is, Manson's. And this is a technique Tarantino uses quite often, because he has to balance the experience of the audience familiar with Manson's story with those who aren't, ensuring the suspense remains effective for everyone. For instance, he does the same thing here, right after the introduction of the family. Because as it ends, we cut to a scene of Cliff and Rick in the car, where there's an initial interaction between this girl and Cliff that foreshadows what's to come. But even more importantly, as the scene closes, the camera pans to this, with a subtle sound cue of a ghostly gust of wind that emphasizes the significance and even the eeriness of this sign, which, if you know anything about the Manson story, is impossible not to find familiar. And just in case there's any doubt about what it's referencing, the next scene introduces...
That was Roman Polanski. He's lived there for a month now.
And, of course, Sharon Tate. And from this simple sequence, the entire film begins to build tension around what will unfold between the Manson family, Tate, and the role these two guys will play. And in a way, this shot serves a similar purpose.
I really wanted Cliff to meet Charlie. I mean, Charlie's really gonna dig you.
And when his name is mentioned for the first time, our danger thermometer rises. And that's when Tarantino does this.
Angel, hold
Well, maybe next time.
Yeah, you gotta come back.
The camera pans to these two women, but doesn't let us hear their dialogue, subtly reinforcing the idea of something hidden beneath the surface of the scene. Although we will find out what it is about in a few seconds when we cut to this.
Not a bad mount, Connie.
Which, by the way, portrays a real situation, because George Spahn let the Manson family stay there, but asked them to work guiding horseback riding tours.
Pussycat brought back some guy with her, and Gypsy wants you to go give him a look-see.
Yeah, sure thing.
But the important thing here is the introduction of one of the film's main antagonists, Tex. But the interesting thing is how he is introduced. With this music, he seems like an authority figure with a certain presence on camera. But the joke is that Tarantino was then going to ridicule him in every way, giving him a regrettable death, in turning that phrase everyone remembers.
I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business.
A laughing comment about something a weirdo said.
And he said, I'm here to do some devil shit. That's not verbatim, but...
Some devil shit.
Yeah, devil shit.
That's why this introduction makes sense, as it builds a false expectation of what this character will be. And it also adds a further danger factor, especially since Tarantino then places special emphasis on making you as a viewer hear the name Tex.
Tex, come on over here and say hi to Cliff.
Howdy, Cliff. Tex? What part of Texas you from?
That if you know the history of the Manson family, it is a name that will disturb you and increase the tension. I mean, just knowing that he's lurking in the area already adds a greater sense of threat.
The Hawaiian guy seems to be okay. Everybody's talking all friendly.
And now we are about to reach the first turning point of the scene, where Tarantino gives us a break, because Tex walks away. It seems that the danger could have passed, but Cliff asks the question that changes the course of the scene.
Hey, does George Spahn still own this ranch?
And when the most accentuated interrogation begins, the house is in the shot all the time.
Does he still live right there?
Yeah.
Is he here now?
And as the situation becomes more threatening,
You can't see him right now.
Why can't I see him right now?
Cliff gradually finds himself increasingly surrounded through the blocking, heightening the sense of danger.
Well, I think I'll just go see for myself.
And this idea is reinforced with the following movement, where we see the group placed in the lower sector, generating a certain feeling of confinement for a Cliff, who by this time seems to have no way out.
The old Hawaiian guy's coming this way.
Okay, y'all, beat it. I'll handle this guy.
Here we begin to see more compressed shots, partly because we are going to start playing with a visual idea of confinement with respect to Cliff. Once the young people come out, the music is incorporated into the sound design, but this time it is a moving and even nice music, which gives a disturbed touch to the scene because it shows off one of Tarantino's common uses in his music, and that made that scene from Reservoir Dogs so memorable, the contrast. On the other hand, characters that will be relevant in the future are present, such as this girl who shares the longest look and who will be part of the assault at the end. And here, we practically shift from a western to a horror film, even in the editing, with much sharper cuts like this one. And with shots where the house is seen from below, combined with framing that obscures who might be hiding behind the door, making the scene even more unsettling. And in the next shot, the confinement is even greater, because he is visually trapped by the composition, surrounded by these characters, with an abundance of negative space that amplifies the unease.
What's your name?
Cliff Booth.
How do you know George?
I used to shoot westerns here at the ranch.
Then, again, there is an interrogation, only this time against Cliff. And Tarantino uses Dutch angles to take that idea of instability and imbalance to the maximum.
I'd really like to say a quick hello now, while I'm here.
For this moment, it is something totally alien to the type of cinema and language that he has accustomed us to.
Oh, I understand, but I'm afraid that's impossible.
Why is that impossible?
When Cliff asks, we cut to the closest shot in the scene, with the girl saying this.
Because me and George like to watch TV on Sunday night, FBI and Bonanza, but George finds it hard to keep awake that late, so I make him take a nap around now so I don't get gypped out of my George TV time.
It is a way of underlining the dialogue. We do not know if it is because the excuse is real or a lie, but it's a funny way to play with us because then we understand that this is exactly true.
Suit yourself.
Anyway, the girl lets him pass and changes the TV channel, which allows Tarantino to play with the sound in another way that we'll see later. But the first thing we hear is this.
You never know.
Which feels almost like Tarantino speaking directly to us, the audience.
You never know.
Signaling that we have no idea what we're about to encounter.
The next time he looks at you, maybe this time he really sees you.
The music is no longer the happy one from before, and I like this shot because it is Cliff's previous moment of doubt, and we have that silhouette of a skull with horns quite present, which somehow coexists very well with the idea of the devil. Anyway, following this, we cut to a couple of shots where the camera makes a small, slow traveling between the faces of those present to generate suspense, until we finally enter.
Because it has Natima medication. Right in it. So clean.
There, the sound is mainly played by the television and flies that give us an idea of the rottenness of the place. We have a subjective shot that follows the route of the space with its dirt and decay, until we reach a rat in a death trap that could well be a reference to George himself inside that house. And from now on, all the elements begin to play much more with the horror genre film.
Oh, Mr. 8 years ago. George is blind.
And obviously there is also the cinematography, where areas of darkness predominate and even play with that idea in this shot. Where Cliff, when entering the house, practically submerges himself in darkness.
One of the things why that scene is effective is Cliff could die in that sequence. Maybe it's like he's gonna make himself go into that room and then they have to kill him because now he knows too much. That all could happen.
But the brilliant thing about the scene is, nothing happens.
Make sure you're doing okay.
I'm not doing okay.
What's the matter?
Can't see shit. Would you call that the matter?
George is in a state of pure and utter decay, but we understand that what the girl said earlier,
because me and George like to watch TV on Sunday night, FBI and Bonanza, but George finds it hard to keep awake that late, so I make him take a nap around now so I don't get gypped out of my George TV time.
is exactly right.
I gotta watch FBI tonight. I watch it with Squeaky. She gets all pissed off if I fall asleep.
And in that sense, the scene is great for several reasons. First, because all that tension dissipates. And in fact, it does so within this very conversation several times through the dialogue, almost as if it were playing with how much it can make you fall into its suspense trap.
What happens when she gets pissed off, George?
Nothing. I just don't like to disappoint her.
And second, because the image of a man who dedicated himself to the film industry and was successful in his time, now being a blind guy, I mean, he can't even watch movies anymore. It's a tragedy that encapsulates the central theme of the film, which is the death of the golden age of cinema and of an era.
You take care, George.
Anyway, once Cliff leaves the house, we'd think from the following setup that the scene is over. The mystery has been solved, there's just a reprimand from the girl, and that's it.
You embarrassed me.
Yeah, sorry about that.
But that's not what happens. It's a small moment of peace to breathe until the suspense returns, although it's a different kind of suspense.
George isn't blind! You're the blind one!
Obviously, we're in full cult mode here, and the idea of danger is reactivated again. Only this time, it's no longer in a terrifying atmosphere, but the music inserts us into the Tarantino universe.
You do that?
And gives us some of what he does best. It's the same exercise he does in the climax and with the film itself. First, he keeps us in tension, then he scares us, finally he relieves us, and lastly, he sets us up in a fantasy that gives us a certain satisfaction, because we're seeing a Manson family member get beaten up by a guy that all the men on the planet would like to be. Where violence is no longer merely a source of entertainment, and cinema is no longer just an excuse to laugh at the witty lines of a charismatic gangster. This time, it's an opportunity to rewrite history through fantasy, and, in doing so, transform a painful memory into a work of art.